seminar series, and it's on aging and technology more broadly. The seminar series tends to be small groups, and we like to have a good deal of discussion afterwards. So usually our speaker speaks for about 40 minutes, and then you're free to ask questions, that sort of thing. Today, our speaker is David Harris-Smith. He's assistant professor here at McMaster in communication studies and multimedia. And he's also director of research for the macGRID simulation network. So he'll tell you a little bit about his work today. His research interests include new media, digital culture, interaction design, and what he's speaking about today, the questions of virtual worlds and mixed reality environments. And his lecture is Anonymity and the Role of Conceptualization in Cybersex and Intimacy in Virtual Worlds, Social Media's Impact on Being Virtually Human. So we'll leave this to you. Great.
Yeah, thanks for coming out. We tried to do this actually a year ago, and it was a big snowstorm, so I was here and nobody else was. So the lecture, and I was surprised when I went back. I thought, oh, I have to prepare this lecture again, and I went back, and actually I had prepared it already. So
fantastic.
It's good because I didn't have any time to do it again. No, that's fine. I can see it. So just to kind of round out, orientation to what I do. I started out as an artist and actually worked as a professional artist, painting, sculpting, photography, etc. for about 20 years, and then decided to go back to school in '99 because I felt like I had somehow kind of fallen out of sync with the kind of current contemporary art world, which has really moved a lot towards more institutional kinds of audiences and hosting of artwork, so new media especially was a big factor there. So went on to do a degree in new media and then a master's degree in film and video at York, and then a PhD. My doctoral work is in communication and culture, so I've got a communication studies and cultural studies combined academic background. For my dissertation work, I thought, okay, I have to go for the most interesting thing because I have fewer chances than most people to land an academic position. So I had become interested in these avatar virtual worlds in 2003, just after Second Life. If you're not familiar with that now, you certainly will be by the time we're done. I was interested in these avatar virtual worlds and began working with Deb Fells, who was one of my supervisors in my dissertation work. She specializes in accessibility technologies or accessible technologies. So different systems for people who have difficulty hearing, for people who have any kind of sensory or motor disadvantage in some way. So we were looking at sexuality as actually one of these areas that is really kind of, we've got wheelchair ramps, we have, accessible doorways, we've got like architecture. A lot of work has gone into what we call the kind of culturally easy cells. But as far as sexuality goes, there's been very little research done, and very little done to accommodate those people who may be experiencing isolation, social isolation for whatever reason. So it could be motor impairment, it could be psychological or psychiatric circumstances, or even the need to be in bed in order if you have some kind of kind of intensive biotechnologies which are helping you live, life support stuff that you may be isolated with those. So that's kind of just a brief introduction, to beginning to work with virtual worlds, and Fells's area of research on this accessible technologies. We could see that there was a lot of sex going on in Second Life. So people were using it as a virtual place to meet and to actually have these cybersexual and cyber intimate, cyber friendship, the whole gamut of real kind of social experience virtually. But since then I've gone on to, that'll be the kind of main topic today, but I've become very much interested in these kinds of socially convening technologies. And this is another example of Hitchbot, which you might be familiar with, which is our hitchhiking robot. Last summer it traveled on its own. It's just a little chatty robot that has geolocation. I can show you a little film here. It traveled across the country last year from Halifax to Victoria, BC, and gained a huge social media following. So it has something like 35,000 Twitter followers, a huge reach on Facebook, Instagram, and we are now just getting ready to do a Germany tour. And they've just produced, we have filmmakers at our house, and they just did this.
Ich komme zu Besuch. Das solltet ihr nicht verpassen. Am 13. Februar geht es los bei Galileo.
There we go. So that's Hitchbot, and we have, so we're just getting ready to do a tour of Germany, and that's coming up in a couple of weeks. So we're interested in this area of artificial intelligence, sociable companion robots, which also is, you'll see, is slightly related to what we're about to talk about here. And tonight, actually 9 o'clock on the Doc Zone CBC, there's a documentary called Roboticized Me, in which Hitchbot has a very small little cameo appearance in that, but they do talk about the state of robotics. This site here, this is our macGRID simulation research network, and so we have now set up for McMaster University and collaborating other universities, health sciences. It's a multidisciplinary site in which we are working with these virtual world environments. We've set up our own, basically our own version of Second Life. So we have something like 65 square kilometers of virtual space, and in which we can model health interaction outcomes. We're currently working on a virtual environment for understanding acute pain. That's with Vicki Gilbrea here at the Rehabilitation Sciences. We're doing these virtual interviews for students who are seeking to get into medicine, for example, the Multimedia interview. And we're also working with the City of Hamilton to model parts of the city for participatory urban planning. So, to get to what we want to talk about today, let's start here. So I have some kind of framing, framing ideas that I think will help to have these before we actually get into the research study that I did. And this is, so framing ideas about anonymity and sexual culture. So anonymity in some cases might be a useful condition, for example, and I was thinking specifically about this group with your critical studies in aging. Anonymity may be a very useful tool in overcoming this, what we call peer group policing, right? So what is permissible for a person of a certain age to be doing, what's not, just unseemly or unbecoming, et cetera. And also in overcoming social isolation, whatever the causes of that may be. So first, we can find in our culture and other cultures that we know many forms and applications of anonymity. Often these are integral with the maintenance and renewal of social structures. So we see periodic anonymity in many cultures. And so, for example, religious examples include the function of anonymity in confessional situations, lawyer-client privilege, doctor-client privileges, the various traditions of carnival, in advance of Lent, for example, often involving masquerade, excess and licentious behaviors, kind of the temporary setting aside of social roles and responsibilities. Another example, Wade Davis, the ethnobotanist, documented the peyote ceremonies in which whole villages kind of begin their annual pilgrimage to the desert by first kind of stripping away the normal signifiers of identity. So old people are referred to as young people, so you might call, address grandparents as children. Children they might address as grandparents, males as females, and vice versa. So they just mix everything up. And of course then what follows is a psychotropic reset with the peyote and this kind of ritualized transgression of most of the interpersonal behavioral codes of the tribe, followed at the end by a general amnesty for any kind of, anything bad that you did, right? They toss a stick into the fire. They say what they did bad, toss a stick into the fire, it's a confessional thing, and the, bad deed is burned and all is forgiven, and they are good for another year. So these examples suggest what we would call the safety valve theory of anonymity, or anonymous behaviors. A necessary counterpart to the cultural constructs that, GRID, social cooperation, collaboration, division of labor, definition of social roles, and the distribution of power. The idea, I think, is relative to the research that I'll present today. Another type of social benefit conferred by anonymity has to do with freedom of expression. Managing the experience of population density is another one. And also the conditions of knowledge production is another one, and also personal and interpersonal experimentation. So our system of casting ballots involves the dissociation of the vote from the voter. Anonymity is certainly an implicit function of urbanization and crowds and public transit, for example, whereby you kind of achieve what we call a truce, and when you're in public in a crowded situation, by, kind of, it's like I would call a managed disinterest in what the people around you are doing. Although covertly we're very observant all the time. Of course, our academic knowledge systems gather intimate information from research participants, which I did, by vouchsafing their anonymity through our research ethics board. Now, anonymity in social media and online virtual worlds is something relatively new, but no less interdependent upon the same kind of cultural forms that are governing behavioral norms and our various anxieties and fantasies framing these norms. So in the research today, these anxieties, both anxiety about, that are related to sexual culture, and also fantasies related to sexual culture. So what I would say, the normative, conservative sexual behavior that people actually engage in, and the kind of what I would call the framing imagination, sexual imagination of a culture, have this interplay, and anonymity has a strong role in how those two things intersect. So, so I think, and it's important when we're looking at this research to consider also how what you're seeing here intersects with actual, interpersonal physical interactions, right? There is a relationship. The two are not, this is over here and that is over there, and they have no relationship to each other. Certainly not the case. And I think it's fair to say that there's a general perception that Western sexual behaviors are becoming increasingly promiscuous and kinky. I mean, who would say that, yeah, that's true? Anybody? You think so? Yeah? Okay. Well, anyway, there's common sense things. I would think that, but, it's actually, once you dig down a little deeper, you find out that, and I'll get to that here. It's kind of an interesting thing. What our common sense approach to things, or the kind of folk wisdom, is often betrayed once you dig a little bit deeper and look into the statistics. So certainly our entertainment and news media seem to reinforce this notion. In books, magazines, music videos, 50 Shades of Grey, films, the internet, I'm sure there's not a person in this room that is not convinced that everyone else is getting more action than they are. So the survey results are somewhat surprising when they actually do good, solid statistical survey work. So, and that's difficult to do. A little aside from that, the Kinsey Institute in the States tried to do a huge, they had something like 350,000 people ready, lined up to do research. Senator Jesse Helms, the Republican conservative, basically shut them down. And this is at a time when they're trying to get information on how to manage AIDS, the spread of HIV. And they wound up having to reduce because they lost all federal funding through the NIH or NIS, whatever it is. So they wound up doing a study of 3,500 people, which is still can be a good study if the sample is done properly. And they were very, very careful and did a good study. This is 1996, but I also have an update here from Canada as well. So in the most recent comprehensive survey of sexual behavior in Americans, heterosexual vaginal intercourse was the most commonly reported partnered sexual activity. Yet 1/4 of women ages 30 to 39, and 1/3 of women ages 40 to 49, and 1/2 of women ages 50 to 59 reported no intercourse in the previous year whatsoever. Maximum percentage of those reporting lifetime incidents of same-sex behavior ranged from 15% of males to roughly 16% of females. And in the most recent US survey, the highest number of individuals having an incident of same-sex behavior in the past year was around 78%. So homosexuality, they figure of people actually practicing homosexuality is probably around that 6, 7, 8% of the population. But of course, we see a larger number of experimentation, people experimenting. So the number of, and this is another one, so this is where we get back to the perception that the grass is greener. The number of sexual partners of American adults since age 18 is estimated at less than 10 partners for 80% of the population. 60% of the population have had 4 or less sexual partners in their lifetime, and that, I think, is a surprise, given what we think, from the media, from our television, from our films. It's sexual imagination in our culture is very kind of what would we say, fertile. So. The majority, and here's another good one, the majority of intercourse occur among those who are married or in long-term dating relationships, supplemented by, so it's a large minority in friendship relationships. Secondly, the most popular sexual behavior next to heterosexual vaginal intercourse is solo masturbation. So percentages of males reporting masturbation in the last month is somewhere between 28 to 68%, depending on where you fall in the age demographic. And also the most commonly reported sexual activity for males under 24 and over 50. 49% of all women, 40% of women reported masturbation in the last month. So the statistics show interpersonal sex is most often occurring in the context of intimate relationships, the large majority of sex occurring in marriages, and the most sexually active range is 25 to 39, with a significant proportions of adults, younger and older, having little or no sexual intercourse, especially the majority of women 50 and older. So the disparity between, now what you have is a disparity between the sexualized mass cultural imagination and the actual conservative nature of, of what is actually occurring on, in our lives. And this has several implications. The disparity introduces tensions between actual and fantasized dimensions of sexuality. And this, of course, is not new. Gagnon and Simon. Gagnon was one of the original, worked with the Kinsey Institute, and Simon these two are working in the field of symbolic interaction. And these guys made this observation, even as far back as the 70s, that what we would call the bracketed normative sexual activity that actually happens, which is this, conservative, mostly married, mostly heterosexual, mostly infrequent sexual relations, and the kind of fantasized pornographic sexualities, it goes back to the Civil War in America, when, with the advent of the camera and large numbers of males, young males off at war, this was really the birth of circulating, pornographic sexual materials in the U.S. So, however, following the historical shift in sexual relationships, sexual relations in the culture, sexual relations between men and women, and then also the mainstreaming, what we would call the mainstreaming of pornography and the sexualization of culture, and this is mostly in the media, signals a shift in the register of these tensions from the civic realm, where it used to be a matter of legal implication, that pornography and the sexual imagination was legislated. It's now become a matter of personal negotiation. So it's ubiquitous, and the register has shifted from the civic environment to a question of personal negotiation with these matters. So I want to kind of underline that our current sexual culture is characterized by a highly sexualized landscape, which exists in the popular imagination, including the media imagination, and that kind of hovers above the ground of fairly stable and conservative everyday sexual practices. And I think this is an important juxtaposition to carry forward to the slides I'm going to show you here. So a symbolic interaction approach to sexuality suggests that we find culture expressed in sex rather than the other way around. So that, rather than that these things are entirely separate, which was kind of the Freudian view that culture and sexual drives are basically antithetical. So the human sexual drive and culture are at war with each other. And the symbolic interaction approach says, no. What's happening in the sexual life of people is an expression of culture. This is the relations, sexual relations, the sexual practices are, including what we do with our sexual imagination, is a reflection of our culture. And often it's a reflection of what the practices are and what the kind of framing, kind of out of bounds kinds of behaviors are. So Gagnon and Simon make a critical distinction. This is a symbolic interactionist approach they make this distinction between sexual fantasy and mundane sexual life as it is actually practiced. So pornography, due to its vicariousness, is part of